As you know, tonight's the AGM, but hopefully it will be brief if you all behave yourself. Before we start, some sad news. One of our members, Alan Chapman, has sadly died. And also Hugh Irving, who is the husband of Jackie Irving, who is another of our members. So our condolences from the History Society go to them. Right, I hope you've all got bits of paper. There is an origami competition at the end of the evening. The person who comes up with the best whatever it is wins. But confetti doesn't count. So, that was me, the chairman's welcome, even if it didn't sound like it. Apologies for absence, have we any? None have been handed in, and I haven't had any. So we'll assume there are none. Minutes of the last AGM, well, quite briefly, very briefly. There was a chairman's welcome. There were apologies from Reg Davis, Ged Griffiths and Georgine Gray. Minutes of the previous AGM were read and agreed. There were no matters arising because they didn't allow any. There was a chairman's report. All of the papers are attached here if anybody wants to see them afterwards. There was a treasurer's report. There was an election of the committee. The committee were re-elected en bloc. We had two new members, Ged Griffiths and Lynn Jones. There were no constitution amendments, and the AGM closed at 1850. Would somebody like to propose that that was a true and accurate record of what went on? Thank you, Barry. Second. Sorry, I haven't got distance glasses on. I've only got reading glasses on. Julie. Thank you. Right. You'll have to shape your names out because I'm as blind as a bat with these glasses. I'm all right reading, but after that, rubbish. Right, where do we go? What did we just do? I can't remember. We did so. Oh yes, true. Yeah. Jude. Excellent. Right. Well, in that case, we'll move on to tonight and Chairman's report. We'd like to start this report by thanking you, our members, for your fantastic support. We have had 90 paid-up members last year, something I hope we can maintain and perhaps add to. On average, 50 members attend each meeting. Guest speakers are surprised at the audience size, and I would like to read to you an appreciative email from Michael Blackburn, who I'm sure you all remember. He said, "You are a great group full of knowledge and enthusiasm, and I wish to thank you for your praise for my presentation and especially the photographs and illustrations and on the varied subjects." So that was him. Usually we thank the speaker, but on that occasion he was thanking us. You could say a backhanded compliment, but I thought it was rather nice that he took the trouble to do that. During the year 2024-25, we've had 10 guest speakers talking on a wide range of subjects. January was called off due to bad weather. The speaker has been rebooked for July. Every meeting has been well supported by members and guests alike. As a result, membership fees, which are due tonight, will once again remain unchanged at the bargain price of £12. Typical Chancellor's comment, isn't it? Yeah. The committee have also held 10 meetings during the year. Once again, the Society was represented at the service of remembrance with our President Di laying the wreath. The 2024 calendar was produced and once again was a sellout. The Society took part in the Christmas Tree Festival in December at St Mary's and the Open Doors event in September. We attended Volunteer Fair on Admiral's Field in August. This attracted a lot of interest for our photographic collection. An invitation to attend a consultation and networking day at Rhuddlan on April the 1st, not a joke, This we accepted. The morning session was devoted to learning about plans for the future of archives. In the afternoon, we had an information table which attracted a lot of interest. The Society has also been represented at Rhuddlan Town Council meetings discussing possible plans for a heritage centre. Paperclip's too big. That wasn't in the minutes. We have organised 3 history days in Rhuddlan Library and now have our own display case as well as those loaned by Denbighshire County Council. We are also planning a VE Day event at the library on Friday the 9th of May from 9:30. That will also be in next year's report. But, you know, good to have early morning. We have had to manage several changes this year with resignations from the committee. Our Minutes Secretary, Pauline, has had to leave us due to ill health problems affecting both her and her husband, John. Sarah, who looked after both membership and research, is in the throes of moving to Inverness. We thank them both for their hard work and enthusiasm, which has helped the Society be what it is today. Julie Greer offered to take over the research role and hit the ground running with an inquiry and a visit of a Canadian family and an inquiry from France. So we're international now. And a man researching courthouses in the UK, with particular interest in St Asaph. Not to mention library display cases, which she also looks after. Charlotte, who looks after our Facebook page, volunteered to take over the membership role. She had a baptism of fire with the numbers attending the Witches of Wales talk with the queue out into the street. The position of Minutes Secretary is still vacant. Silence. And I suppose 2 out of 3 must rate us as a success. So my thanks to the following: Isabel for writing up the speaker's notes for the parish magazine, Chris keeping the accounts and patiently arranging NatWest Bankline appointments with me when VAX payments are required, Stephen Ashley for looking after our photo library, Hayden for running the monthly raffle, Julie, our researcher, Charlotte, who looks after the Facebook page and membership, Graham, who looks after the Society's website. We're nearly there. Reg, who looks after his mountain of Rhuddlan artefacts and can always be called upon when help is needed. At the last meeting, I asked for helpers who could take on small tasks to assist the committee. So thanks to Colin and Victor, who are helping to set up the room for our meetings, and to Colin for the distribution of posters advertising our meetings. Going forward, and already completed, is the speaker list for 2025-26, and a start has already been made on 26-27. I look forward to another successful year. Once again, my thanks to you all. Why not come along to one of our committee meetings to see what we get up to? You could be the missing committee member that we're looking for. Thank you, and that concludes my report. Right, moving on. Treasurer, you have a statement of accounts in front of you, or you should have. I'm sure you've all read it diligently. Would you like to propose that that be accepted? Somebody? Steve, thank you. And somebody to second that? Georgie. Is it? Yes. The glasses are working now. Right. Steve and Georgie. Right. The election of committee. I can tell you that the committee that we have currently has agreed to stand again. And I haven't brought the list of who they are, but I went through them when I gave my report. Would somebody like to propose that that be the case? You're not satisfied with us? Yes, oh, Georgine, thank you. And the seconder? Yeah, John. Thank you. Right. we have one amendment to the Constitution, and that is the change of the financial year. At the moment, it runs from the 6th of April to the 5th of April, like, you know, the tax year. That interferes rather with, or it clashes with the fact that we have our meetings the first Friday in the month. So what we'd like to do is have the financial year from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. Has anybody any objections to that? Thank you. And that one's accepted. In that case, that closes the AGM. I told you it would be painless if you all behaved yourself. Thank you for behaving yourselves. And thank you for being part of it. Right, the next part of the evening is our guest speaker. He needs no introduction because he is a member of the Society. Indeed, yes. And Michael Corfe has spoken to us before. He is a member of many organisations, and I would like to welcome him tonight. And he's going to talk to us about Henry Morton Stanley. Would you like this?
I don't know. Do you think I need this?
I don't know. It worked for me.
How's my voice to you at the back? You'd like me to have the microphone? Okay, yes.
It worked for me. Where's the other half?
How is that? Is that good? Again. Higher. Higher. Have you increased the sound of this?
I think they mean higher up your jacket.
Right. Up the nose.
Try that.
I feel I've been awarded a microphone. Any good?
Better.
Better. All right.
Turn it up a bit. The only thing is, if you turn it up too much, it starts to squeal.
Yes.
Try that.
How's that? I was just telling Chairman that when my headmaster at my school said 1, 2, 1, 2 testing, I got into trouble and I got 6 of the best because when he said 1, 2, I said, you can't. Come out here, he said. And all the pockets are stitched up on this jacket. Thank you, Chairman.
I'll leave you to whatever you need to be left to.
Well, we know where we are. Just seeing my name come up there, John Michael Corfe. I had a heart attack and I was taken into Bottomwithin Castle. And the nurse said, date of birth, gave it to her. She said, full name? I said, John Michael Corfe. She said, how do you like to be known? And I said, Michael. She said, okay, John. That's the way things are. I'll start by saying we live in an age which is far more broad-minded than the society of Stanley's day. Many people regret the passing of the established order of things, especially the protocol of courtship, betrothal, engagement, and then the reading of banns, and then marriage, for better or worse, parenthood, and the struggles for survival throughout life. Now it's hire honey and hop into bed. If it works, we might cohabit, and if that works, we might just get married, and the children can be bridesmaids or page boys. Well, Stanley lived in a very, very strict age. He suffered in a very harsh, rigid Victorian world. Right, I put this up because the fees, I guess, I support these charities, or should I say you support these charities, because those fees go to spread across these charities, and so I put them up. They're all human, not animal-based. I just want to say thank you very much on behalf of all those charities. I'd like you to just remember, this is my wife and my son. I'd like you to remember my son for a minute or two, or should I say till the end of this talk. Years ago, I got the Cheshire Life, and there was an article in this. Can't really see my own script here. We were a proud empire, and Stanley was almost the epitome of the hero. He'd famously gone into darkest Africa and found the lost explorer, Dr. Livingstone. So why should there be any objection to a statue honouring Stanley in his hometown of Denby? You know, I could find nothing against him, so I went out to Denby. We lived in the Rhuddlan at the time, and I came out here, Castle Dinbicor, we Philistine English say, Denby Castle. I found the statue, quite thrilled to find it as well. And Dr. Livingstone, I presume, little story in his life, Bula Matari. That's another angle of it. And that. And a little boy was actually shaking hands with him, which I thought was sweet. The Jesuits, the Roman Catholic Jesuits say, give me a child till he's 7, and I'll give you the man. And there's a certain truth in it, and I think it should be borne in mind when we look at Sir Henry Morton Stanley. I'm convinced that his particular childhood made him the man that he was. A whole life in 40 to 50 minutes. I'm simply not going to attempt to illustrate the influences that shaped the man, but I'll try to. It also may seem sacrilege, but I'm not going to dwell in any depth in total on the nearly 30 years of his amazing expeditions. I really want to examine the makings of a quite extraordinary Victorian hero. And I started my researches with these two books, and this one on the right, Tim Geel, is almost the definitive story of his life, and he examines what made the man think, what made him tick. These are the areas I'm going to look at: the child, the man and his careers, the time, the expeditions, and the truth, and the perceptions of how he's remembered. I do get a little bit annoyed when people are tearing down statues thinking they're changing history, because we have a dreadful history, as I'm going to go on to show. His mother, Stanley's mother, Elizabeth Jones, nee Parry, she was a very promiscuous lady, and little John Rowlands was her first of 5 illegitimate children, although she went on to marry the father of the final 2. She's not a very nice lady. I'm sorry if your name is Parry, or well, it might be Jones, might it, but I'm sorry if your name is Parry, but if you're related to her, she wasn't a very nice lady. He was born in this little cottage, the cottage of his father. It's thought that his father was probably James Vaughan Hall. Thought that might be him ringing now. His father was thought to be James Vaughan Hall, who was a very, very influential man in Denby. He was an alderman, he was a high-flown solicitor, and he had good reason to not be the parent of a prostitute's child. So it's thought that he may well have paid the town drunkard, a man called John Rowlands, to take the paternity. And that's what it said on poor old John Rowlands' birth certificate. The child, John Rowlands, bastard. That's all it said. And he lived with that all his life, and he hated it. It really was a burden to him all his life. Both James Vaughan Hall and his purported father, John Rowlands, are both buried in Clanrider Church. That's the stone put up by James Vaughan's widow. Moses Parry, his mother's father, in other words, his grandfather, lived at one time in this house. Very, very nice house, and I think some of us get our COVID injections there. But something happened in his life, and I don't know what it was, but he lost money, and he ended up in this little cottage, which in fact is on Denby Green. That's it. That's a current photograph of it. It faces St Henry's Church across there, and that church was demolished in about 1928. The reason, it hadn't got a graveyard because this is all solid granite. You can't bury people in granite. So John Rowlands will have been baptised there. And you can see the church has been demolished, although they left the tower up. That house comes into our story at some point. Moses Parry, his grandfather, looked after the child. His mother, just dumped him on her father and she went off to London. And he was brought up by his grandfather. I say brought up, he was out digging the fields in front of that cottage. They were digging potatoes, and one day his grandfather cried out and dropped dead. Oh, the little boy was 5.5 years of age. Terribly sad start. And he was actually then dependent on his mother's family, who weren't the kindest of people, I've got to tell you. His grandfather used to take him down to this church, and his grandfather adored him. He used to take him on his knee and teach him, and he was a good little learner. But they were on this field when his grandfather died. Well, that's Vale Street in Denby. And the little boy was actually placed with his two uncles, Moses and James Parry, his mother's two brothers, who were butchers in Vale Street. I think that's the butcher's shop. And they didn't want a bastard child in their household, so they palmed him out to a couple called Richard and Jenny Price in Denby. And they gave them quite a generous £half a week, which was quite a lot of money in those days. It's probably equivalent to £130 now. And after 6 months, they thought, oh, they probably didn't love him enough. They stopped paying. Well, no, that wasn't the case. Richard and Jenny Price told their 27-year-old son to get the little boy ready for a journey. And 27-year-old Richard Price, the son, put the little boy on his shoulders and he marched him down past this butcher's shop. He said, where are we going? He said, you're going to your new auntie's, right? And they went past the butcher's shop and they ended up at the new auntie's. Put him down on the doorstep and he started to go away. And little John Rowlands said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to get you some sweets and cake. And off he went. He never came back. And of course, that was the workhouse. And so at 5.5, 6 years of age, he was put into the workhouse. But they were terrible places, the workhouses. The English society of the time was incredibly cruel, terribly hard. And it was a punishment for being poor. A lot of them were poor because they'd been kicked off the common land by these Enclosures Act. And it was purportedly to make better use of the land, but you know that when we look at the land in the States now, they're deer parks and hunting grounds, so they're certainly not ploughed for better usage. But anyhow, he's in the workhouse. These are the rules. Now, it's very hard for me to read them here. I'm sure you can't read them. I'll see if I can get there. They're actually virtually, I won't try to read them, but they're saying, don't put a foot wrong here or you'll be put on bread and water for 3 days. And literally, that could happen. If you rebelled at all, if you swore or you made a face at one of the wardens, you could be suffered. And in the workhouse, siblings were separated, parents, man and wife were separated, parents were separated from children, and brothers and sisters, of course, separated. It was appalling. It was to make sure they didn't have any joy in the workhouse. It was to make sure they never thought they could go in there and it'd be an easy life. They couldn't live on the parish. Now, this is the workshop. He will have taken to the front door here. And when he was about 10, he escaped from the workhouse and he ran all the way back 5 miles from St. Asaph back to Denby, and he went to his aunt's house, Aunt Kitty, and Kitty was married to one of the butcher boys. And she took him in, gave him a nice meal, played with his little cousins. She put him to bed in a lovely warm bed. He thought he'd landed. The following morning, she had him marched right back to the workhouse. So he's 10 and he's got another 5 years to live in the workhouse. Appalling stars. Well, when he was 15 and a half, he was allowed to leave the workhouse. And he'd worked hard in there. He got the Bishop of St. Asaph's first prize for his homework. So it was quite interesting. But he was put out back to his family, and he went to one of his mother's other sisters, and she lived in St. Wino. That's his St. Wino farm. He absolutely loved it there. But she had a son who was an Oxford-educated man, and he was actually at outside Holywell. Oh my goodness, have my brain. Brentford. There's a school in Brentford where he was teaching, and he took little John Rowlands down there to be a pupil teacher. In other words, he would help educate the younger children. And this went on quite well. The arrangement was good, but his auntie said it would spoil her son's chance of marriage to have a bastard child in the household. So she got him ready one day. This is Brentford School where he was. He was a pupil teacher here when he was 15, 16. And he said he would have worked tirelessly for the whole of his life for his auntie if she'd given him one loving, friendly smile. She never did. She got him ready one day, had him photographed there. This is when he's left the workhouse. Had him photographed, she gave him a guinea, and they took him to Liverpool to another sister of the Parrys. And you imagine leaving the beautiful hills, the Clwydian hills, and being taken from that, going from a beautiful environment to the vile smells and sounds of the rather filthy slums of Liverpool. Well, that's the slums of Liverpool. Horrible. But of course, in the Enclosures Act, a lot of the peoples who'd been thrown off the common land, they were herded into the towns, and it made for cheap labour for the industrialists, and very, very hard times. But it also meant they were living in squalor. And a very crowded city he wouldn't be used to as a child from Wales. He got a little job delivering meat for a local butcher in Liverpool, and he was delivering meat to one of the ships in the harbour on the Mersey. And he said he decided he was going to sign up to be a cabin boy. Now, the captains of ships in those days were notorious for being very hard on cabin boys, because they knew if they were very hard, the kids would jump ship when they got to the end of the journey, and they wouldn't have to pay them their wages, which is exactly what happened. He actually jumped ship when he got to America, and he stumped in Victorian level, became a new man in America. He slept on a bale of hay on the harbour in New Orleans. And quite incredible. He decides, I think, that he's going to make a new life, totally. He went in very much a Charles Dickens way. He went to a man in a local store, and he said, "Do you want a boy, sir?" And this man, Mr. James Speake, said, "Yes, he did." And he worked industriously for this man for about 9 months. And then, blow it, James Speake dropped dead. Which, you know, it couldn't get harder than that, but it was very hard on the little boy. So John Rowlands has decided he's going to become a new man. And you say, why change your name? Well, here's a few name changes. Harry Webb became Cliff Richard. Marion Morrison became John Wayne. Ronald Wycherley became Billy Fury. Priscilla Maria Veronica White became Cilla Black. Amy Lyon became Emma Hart, later Emma Hamilton. Amandine Aurora Lucille Dupin George Sand. And Charlotte Bronte became Lord Charles Albert Florian Wellesley when writing the 1833 novel The Green Dwarf. And of course John Rowlands decided he was going to call himself after the richest man in the town. So he wasn't going to be Mr. James Speake's son. He was going to be Henry Stanley, because Henry Hope Stanley was the richest man in town. We don't know, there's no proof, and they've researched all they can, and they can't find any adoption by Stanley in the town. So he's in the USA now, he's aged 19. And this is him at the Battle of Shiloh, and he's fighting on the southern side. He was captured, American Civil War prison, Camp Douglas. He promptly changed sides and he joined the Union Army, the Yankee. He's very good at this, deciding I'm going to do this, and does it. And he made his way back from America on a ship again, because he escaped from the army. He actually deserted from the army, and he joined a ship sailing back to Liverpool. And he came to Cross Foxes at Glasgow, and he presented himself there. And his mother answered the door, and she said, "What are you doing here, bringing shame on the family?" Very nice mum. So he was that distraught with this, his mother not wanting to recognise him, that he walked back to Liverpool, from Denby to Liverpool. And he stayed at the Cotton Picker pub in Liverpool. That's the Cotton Picker pub there. And then, of course, he decides he's going to join the US Navy. So he got a ship back to America and joined the US Navy. He gathered friends, and it has been said that they thought he may have been homosexual, because he gathered male friends and he absolutely demanded loyalty from them. If they didn't give him loyalty, he was savage with them. But in fact, all his writings and every witness to him say that he was totally heterosexual. But this man stuck with him for a long, long time. And his image building, he came in a bogus US Navy uniform in a carriage back to Denby on one of the trips. And, you know, they know it was wrong. It was the wrong buttons on the jacket. Back to Glasgow Cottage. There his mother will have been. While he was on this trip home, he rather fell for this girl, Catherine Casey Parry. First government and first love, Casey. It's actually on Vale Street, and Beach House, that's the home of Katie Guff Roberts, his cousin. He went to visit there, and I love it because that's my wife and I's doctors. When I go in there, I know that I'm walking into a house where I know Stanley has been. He goes back to America, and with all the cheek he's got, I mean, he's got this ability to lie and fib and make up stories, all fantasies, but he went to the world's richest journalist, a bit like Richard Murdoch is now. He went to Gordon Bennett, and this is the Gordon Bennett where we all say, Gordon Bennett. He was outrageous, this man. At a social gathering once, he turned and he felt like a pea, so he peed into fire. Men and women in the room. Terrible, terrible fellow. But he was quite an eccentric, but extraordinarily rich. And he said he wouldn't take him on as a journalist. He wouldn't give him expenses, but he said if he sends him stories from across the world, he would pay for them. So he's got himself now to be a journalist and an employee of the biggest newspaper in the world. This is a photograph of him as a young journalist. He's got a good head of hair there. As I say, he's desperate to make a name for himself. Now, I'm going to go a little digression here. My wife tells me off for this digression because it sounds as though I'm going into a rant, but it's really to emphasise the kind of time we're living. English establishment was not a very nice establishment, I've got to say. Hero monster, we have to remember that the times he lived in were very different, and he was a creature of his time. Colonialism, the empire, the Queen and country are everything to us, the British, no matter who suffered. And this is true. We had these massive statues of Queen Victoria and establishing us with the strength of the empire. Buildings like this, glory in our power. And I can remember, as kids, we got cards, you know, British Empire Day. Another one, Empire Day, 24th of May. It's coming up soon, Kenneth Gostin. I can remember my mother actually going down to Rob's in Birkenhead and she asked for a pair of nigger brown trousers and nigger brown jumper. We had no shame about it. We were the best in the world. Well, there has been a number of articles saying that Britain has a rather whitewashed its imperial background. It has, because we've got a very, very savage background. And I've got to say, it's not Welsh, it's not Scottish, it's not Irish, it's mainly English that caused it. Quebec, Peterloo, the Boers, Ireland, Amritsar. I'll just quickly go into them. General Wolfe, man from Kent, he was sent to Scotland to burn out the Scots. They wanted the Highlands cleared. Our present monarch owns about 50,000 acres in Scotland. He slaughtered men, women and children, and he torched hundreds of crofts. So it appears he was the ideal man to send to Canada to try and burn the French out. And that's General Wolfe. Well, he was killed at the Battle of the Abraham Fields, and there he is. That's a picture by Romney of his death scene. The French liked it that much, that picture, that they had a similar painting of their general, who was also killed at the battle. And, of course, a similar French painting. Then we've got Peterloo. You know, this is 1819. Waterloo was 1818 rather. And this is a year after Waterloo. This man was sent up. There was an unarmed crowd wanting the vote because life was very hard. They weren't rewarding the soldiers of Waterloo. Men were starving, families were starving, and they wanted a vote. And this man was sent, and he went in. I say the protesters, political leaders had specifically ordered that no one was to come under arms to St. Peter's Field in Manchester, where a meeting of nearly 100,000 people was simply demanding a right to vote and some relief from the dire poverty of the masses after Waterloo. So a totally unarmed crowd attended the political meeting. Mounted cavalry under General Byng charged into the crowd with sabres drawn, and in the ensuing confusion, 15 people were killed and 650 were injured. And actually a lady with her child, a lady dressed in white and carrying a 2-year-old infant, was knocked down and the child was killed, making him the first death of what became known as the Peterloo Massacre. That's the Peterloo Massacre. Unarmed, against sabre and swords. Then we've got General Kitchener, South Africa. I mean, he, first Earl Kitchener. I was raised thinking he was a hero. He was a dreadful fellow. He did exactly what Wolfe did in Canada. The Boer farmers were in the main, built homes and farms and tamed the wild was fertile lands of South Africa. They were burnt out, imprisoned, transported under Kitchener's scorched earth policies, and he was burning farms there. What really we wanted were the diamonds and the gold and the land. You think of concentration camps and we tend to automatically think of Nazi Germany or the Russian gulags, but Kitchener and the English government created the very first ever concentration camps in South Africa to deal with the Boers. 27,000 Boers died within our British concentration camps. You see the work of Emily Hobhouse or visit Cornwall's Regimental Museum at Bodmin. We haven't got a happy memory. That's an English concentration camp in South Africa. The poor had been driven off the common lands under the Enclosures Act. Kitchener, with the approval of the British government, transported over 28,000 Poles to places like St Helena and South Africa. We took over South Africa. We took the land, the gold and the diamonds. Finally, I think it's finally, General Dyer, known as the butcher, ruthless butcher of Amritsar, again, an unarmed crowd of Indians didn't want England to have India. So they wanted us out, and they wanted the vote so they could vote us out. Well, he, again, unarmed Indians, simply wanted independence from us. He was called the Butcher of Amritsar. He ordered 92s carrying Lee-Enfield rifles to open fire on men, women and children, and to continue firing until they ran out of bullets. It's a dreadful story. That's a picture of it. So white and British superiority, it is questionable. They say we've opened up Africa, but one wonders, have we? Valerie Watts, she's a wonderful voice, very, very powerful, so she's known as Megawatts, singing Land of Hope and Glory. That music is magnificent by Eldar, but I've got to tell you, there's A.C. Benson who wrote the words, reflected on them and felt, no, they were wrong. Because we're using, if you look at it, Land of Hope and Glory, Mother of the Free, how shall we extol thee, who are born of thee? Wider still and wider shall thy bounds be set. God who made thee mighty, make thee mightier, yes. Well, you know, if you go to the Oxford English Dictionary, might is the great power or strength of resources, power of enforcing your will with all one's power. It's not a very nice story. We're worrying now about Putin expanding himself into Ukraine and Netanyahu expanding himself into Gaza. And we're worrying now about a man on the other side of the pond expanding and wanting Canada and wanting Greenland. You can see why my wife thinks I'm going into a rant. Just before we leave the rather unsavoury side of our history, we have to be more local. And I wonder how many of you have heard of the Welsh Knot?
Yes.
You have?
My father experienced it.
Did he really? It's an appalling story, the Welsh Knot. Last child in class to utter a word in Welsh had a board hung round his or her neck inscribed WN. Welsh Knot. Because the English government of Westminster decided that anyone speaking Welsh could be subversing authority. So they were going to drive Welsh out of the schools. Dreadful thing. And I don't sound like an Englishman, do I? I remember ringing my brother in Wirral and saying, do you know, you're English? And he said, Michael, you're English. I said, no longer, I'm not. I'm Welsh now. Welsh not. They were given a thrashing or a flogging. So those were the times. That'll teach them not to speak in their mother tongue. So let's get back to Stanley. Gordon Bennett, the volatile Baron Stanley's employer. He told Stanley to go on a massive journey. And I'm going to try and get up to where I write about this on my notes, because it's quite a story. Right, ooh.
Put the lights on.
It would help. Bless you. Ah, that's fabulous. Thank you. He appointed Stanley as a war correspondent, and his fellow war correspondents said the bullets were virtually passing his hair. He was a very brave frontline man. Suddenly he was recalled to Paris to meet Gordon Bennett, and he was advised to go by way of, listen to this, he had to go by way of Egypt and the opening of the Suez Canal, to Abyssinia, to Turkey, to Palestine, to Syria, to Iraq, the Crimea, Persia and India, then on to Zanzibar, that island off the east coast of Africa, where he was to make preparations to go into darkest Africa and find Dr. Livingstone. Livingstone hadn't been heard of for about 2 years. very brave man to go into Africa at the time, because it was totally unmapped and a very dangerous place. Stanley was the first to report. Here he is in Berbera, gone native. He was the first to report at Magdala, and mainly by cheating. He bribed the Suez telegraph office. He bribed the telegraph operator, hold back everyone's reports till mine gets through. And of course it made him look very good in the eyes of Bennett. Livingstone was a good man by Victorian Empire standards. His philosophy was simply, the savage must be civilized through the Bible, and then educated, then taught to work, and then that would enhance the productivity of the great British Empire. Livingstone, I've got to say, was the stuff of legends. He was once attacked by a lion, and it dislocated his shoulder, and it tore his arm. He repaired the injury himself without anaesthetic, and that is a monument in Blantyre in Scotland of the incident. That's his house in Scotland. This is why it does annoy me when I hear that the Stanley Hospital, they now call Livingstone Place. They don't call it Stanley Place. It was the Stanley Hospital, but there you are. So that's Livingstone's home. This is Livingstone reading the Bible to the blacks in Africa. It's an insult to Stanley to try to describe his 20 years of 4 main expeditions in the matter of 10 minutes, but here perhaps is just a flavour of their magnificence and the horrors. His 4 expeditions, of course, this main one, find Dr. Livingstone. Then he's tried to convince governments that it was possible to do a trans-Africa journey. Nobody believed it was possible because the terrible jungles and savages and all sorts of things. And he wanted to develop the Congo Basin and the Nile Basin, and then finally the Yemen Pasha Rescue. So this is the first, find Dr. Livingstone. When he got to Zanzibar, that little island off the east of Africa, he didn't tell the British consul there, John Kirk, that he was actually intending to go and find Livingstone. He just queried where was he likely to be, and very roundabout, circuitous way. But this John Kirk was a poor friend to Livingstone. He was supposed to be sending supplies into the jungle and wherever Livingstone was. He was never doing it, and a lot of the supplies were just stolen, and he gave up on it. When Stanley got back to England eventually, he criticised John Kirk very heavily. He hired and organised 200 porters. He faced 975 miles into completely unknown territory. Swamps, jungles, tsetse flies, deaths, desertions, and the theft of precious supplies, indisciplined, fiercely armed tribesmen, and cannibals. So he was facing terrible dangers. These 2 dreadful characters are 2 of 4 whites that he had as his section leaders. This fellow was a womanizer, and he grabbed every African woman he could to rape them. And this one was a drinker, constantly drunk. So they weren't good leaders. He bought a slave boy. Stanley bought a slave boy, and he didn't buy him for the boy to be a slave to him. He bought him really as a son, and he adopted the boy. That's Kalulu. This is Stanley. He adopted the boy. That's Livingstone back in 1864. A very similar man to Stanley, actually. So he's crossing the MacArthur Swamp there. I mean, you're talking terrible dangers when they're in the waters like this. Crocodiles and tsetse flies, all sorts of horrible things. There's the stream nearly up to their mouths. This is a bit of his exaggeration. When he wrote a book, he shows himself aiming a gun at the boy and saying, "Drop that and I'll shoot you." But in fact, he did love the blacks. He had more respect for them than he did for a lot of the whites. There's Zanzibar, where he started, and this is the journey he made. See, he's gone all the way up here to Ujiji. And in Ujiji, that's where he found Livingstone, who was very, very ill at the time. He was extremely weak. They instinctively liked one another. We think he had found his father figure because he hadn't had a person he could look up to now in his life. This is the famous picture of Dr. Livingstone, I presume. It's possible that it's just journalistic jingo. He may not have actually said that, but it's fitting, and everyone knows the expression. And then he went off with Livingstone on the lake, and they did a lot of exploring. He found from Livingstone that Livingstone was trying to find the source of the Nile. It's quite extraordinary. When he got back to London, Livingstone gave him papers but refused to come home. He gave him letters, and the letters went to his family. There's a lot of people incredulous that an American had found our hero Livingstone. No, it's not possible. And yet when the family turned up, they said the letters were genuine, they had to acknowledge it. And so that's how he was presented in the press. There was initial skepticism. But there you are, presenting his image to the world. It's sad that he actually makes the boy look like he's a slave boy, but in fact he was very affectionate with that little boy. But he does look like a slave to him. When they're busy pulling down statues, they really should be busy pulling down the statue of Queen Victoria, because she presented him with this jewelled box with her monogram on, Victoria Regina, and she knighted him, so he became Sir Henry Morton Stanley. He went on a tour, sorry that's a horribly blurred picture, but he met a girl called Alice Pike, aged 17, and she was engaged to in 1874. He asked her to wait while he went off and made his fortune, but she didn't. His second great expedition was crossing the African continent, and again, starting in Zanzibar, he wrote a rather emotional letter saying he thought this may be the end of him because he knew of the dangers he was facing. But in fact, he was going to go on to live a lot longer than the man he was writing to. These are the people he took with him. And again, he recruited over 200 to go on this journey. He had great respect for these people. These are the Wagwana people. They're very brave women who went along on the journey, helping feed and cook for the men. And he made this journey, let's follow him. See, he's gone across all the way down, right down to the Congo, on the other side of Africa. So he proves that it is possible to get across Africa through all the swamps and jungles and dangers of tribes and so on. And again, the men he took with him at the end of his journey. Sadly, on that journey, he lost Kalulu, the young boy who went over this waterfall and was drowned, very sadly. And he lost a very good friend, Frank Pocock. He got help from Tico Tip, the ultimate slaver. He had an army of about 1,000, and he used to go in and capture young blacks and sell them for slavery. It's a dreadful man. But he employed him because he was nearly killed himself. He employed him to defend them. And of course he got a lot of stick for it when he got back. This is him with his two servants, Lady Emmanuel, after his Trans-Africa journey. This is him in Paris with Anthony Swinburne, because he's now a famous character. Everybody wants to know Sir Henry Morton Stanley. He's the great hero of the day. Yeah, very keen on this lady, May Sheldon. This is a photograph of him as he's getting older, and he went to the English government and he said to them, look, if we set up an expedition and we can get African chiefs to agree to it, we could civilise the Congo and have a lot of industry there, and it will help the British Empire. They wouldn't hear of it because they thought he was American. Just wouldn't hear of it. And the Daily Telegraph said they would put £25,000 behind him if he could get equivalent funding from elsewhere. He went back to Gordon Bennett and he got the funding. So he's got £50,000 to go. And this man, King Leopold of the Belgians, he was quite disingenuous, he really was. He was after a greedy expansion of Belgium, and he was in the Belgian Empire. Well, he employed these men, Mountjoy Hobson, Thomas Park, William Sellers. This is very cruel and brutal Edmund Barthelot, later murdered after excessive cruelty. Sergeant William Bonney, he was the only decent white amongst those whites you've seen. And Jameson, he bought an 11-year-old girl, he fed her cannabis and then gave her to cannibals. And he made notes on how she was killed, how they butchered her, and how they cooked her, and how they ate her. He made meticulous notes of it. And he died when they were out there. It probably explains why I never buy Jameson's whiskey. I said, dreadful man. But he died in one of the camps, and they went into his belongings and they found the notes of everything that he'd done. It's dreadful. Developing the Congo Basin, again a very similar thing, but this is how they were treating the blacks. Terrible. He was sent to rescue Eamon Pasha, and Eamon Pasha was very, very much like Stanley and like Livingstone. Not sure he wanted to be rescued. But King Leopold, again, he's the real guilty party, and he was so responsible for cruel crimes that currently Stanley's blamed for right now in the 21st century. The Belgians, when they went in down the Congo, Stanley had made agreements with African chiefs that we're going to develop here, we'll bring work, and it all sounded great to the African chiefs. The Belgians came in and they wanted rubber. And if the workers didn't get the quota, they chopped a hand off, or they chopped an arm off, or they chopped a leg off. They were quite appalling. I've got one photograph in my researches where they chopped a child's hand off to punish the father. Dreadful thing. And this is the Belgians. And this is Eamon Pasha. I say perhaps another Stanley. He's a German who, disenchanted with his native Germany, he posed as a romantic Turk and eventually became a governor of the Egyptian province of Equatoria in Upper Nile. He was later murdered by slavers. Again, this journey right across Africa. And these are the men he took with him on that journey. These are the camps that they had to make, and they were disease-ridden. It was a terrible time. Many of them just died exactly where they were. And this is how they knew that Jameson fellow, they found his notebooks in his pack. At Yamboa camp, behind the Palisades. These are the Wangwana people, and he had great admiration for them. They're very, very brave workers. Here he is discovering Eamon Pasha, and they carried Eamon Pasha up from Lake Albert. And Punch ran this cartoon saying, I wonder who rescued who. You know, they were always incredulous that this so-called American, because he had to keep up the, tangled we were first we set out to sea. Sorry. And there he is going bush. again with the people of his journey. And as he got older, this lady, Dorothy Tennant, vaguely related to Colin Tennant, who gave an island to Princess Margaret, if you remember. If you read Helen Popper's novel, The Butterfly and the Bee, and I think she may have spoken to you here, or if she doesn't, she's at one worth noting. She was too ambitious for the reluctant Stanley, but she got her way, and he became a member of Parliament. That's him at the time of his marriage, 1890. He was a reluctant politician. He said he'd rather have the jungles of Africa than the jungles of Westminster. And you can understand, because people have got a lot of disrespect for Westminster. He started another lecturing tour. This time it was a great success, both here and in America, in 1891. Alice Pike, when she was 17, against Sir Stanley in 1874. He met her again in 1880. That's a press engraving of him and press depictions of him. So here he is. Great friend of Sir William McKinnon, who was very supportive of him. And he had a valet, William Hoffman. This man kept notes on Stanley, and they've proved very useful to historians of the work of Stanley's life. And that was Stanley's house in Purbright in Surrey. So he's done well. That's him with another adopted son, Denzel. And he said, the man who travels and reflects loses illusions faster than he who stays at home. Well, that's the year before his death. And that's his stone, his gravestone in Purbright. Richard, his grandson, this is Denzel's son, laying a wreath in Leopoldville in 1954. And I ask you to remember this statue for a moment, because he's a hero in Belgium, Stanley. What do the Africans think of him? Well, there's that statue today. And you see what they've done? They've chopped his legs off. Very symbolically. New York Herald, 1870. Notice the legs are chopped off. It might be symbolic that they've done that. See, the legs chopped off the feet. Statue of Henry Morton Stanley pulled down after Congo's former dictator Mobutu Sese Seko rejected it. And in St. Asaph today, you can read all about it, because this is a notice board in St. Asaph. We moved from the Wirral to St. Asaph, my wife and I, and the notice board there gives you a very full life of him. And they put this memorial to him. It's another shot of it. And that house that was supposed to be his auntie's, which was in fact the workshop, well, his figure was on the wall. So they were quite proud of having the connection of one of their former schoolboys from the workshop. But the ex-workshop, now proud to have connections with him. There they were, the two little figures. And then being 10 years ago, it became the H.M. Stanley Hospital. So again, it was honouring his name, which is rather nice. But going on, greater changes have occurred. The hospital was sold to private developers, and they started selling their houses with these offices at the gates. They've cleared all these roads around it. These are all, there's houses on all these sites now. Sorry. Houses all along here. Houses all along here. It's a massive housing estate. And that's the sales brochure. And if you notice on the wall here, they've taken the picture, the little statue of Stanley off the wall. That was the brochure of the old house. I've put an arrow there because I showed you at the start of the story, my son. Well, that's our son's home, right there at the beginning. At least one man capitalised on Stanley's fame, the IPA, I presume ales, and that's a Denby man. And there's a little library in Denby Library, a library within the library, of stories of Stanley, and they've got a figure of him inside as well. Not everyone likes him, as you can see. Wearing his famous Stanley hat, and that Bulabatari means the breaker of stones, which in Kikongo language is a kind of insult. So hero or monster, I'll leave you to decide. Diolch yn fawr. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen?
What do you think of it?
I like him. I think he's really to be admired. And I think it's ridiculous that we try to change history.
I think that's behind, otherwise we'll charge you. Thank you, Michael. Well, we started off in Denby and you've taken us halfway around the world and brought us back home again.
Yes.
Very thought-provoking, very interesting, and I'm sure everybody who knows anything about the subject will have different views. So thank you very much for this evening, most kind. Just to remind you that next month on the, well, you've got your cards on the, was it 2nd of June? Change my glasses. 6th of June. We've got Robert Jones and the remarkable Mr. Poshin. He was a guy that put a lot of work into making Prestatyn what it is today. So that's next month. This month, we've still got the raffle, and then following that, we've got some nice refreshments. So don't rush away. Hey! What major prize have we got tonight?
Just Jack will have.